Welcome back, and today we have a pretty touchy subject. One of the most controversial things in photography is RAW versus JPEG. Which one are you shooting? Well, recently Polin and Tony Northrup got into a little bit of a YouTube spat with that very topic, RAW versus JPEG. What's better? And I watched both videos, and I kind of wanted to give you guys my interpretation on kind of how I saw what both of them said, what I agree with, what I disagree with, and then you guys feel free to agree or disagree with me in the comments. Just keep it respectful. And I mean, Jared and Tony, I both have the utmost respect for both of them. They're great photographers. They teach a lot of people a lot of stuff. So let's get into it. But remember, keep it respectful, because these are two guys that I have a lot of respect for and I've learned a lot from. So let's get right into it. So Tony starts out by saying, RAW files are big and slow to process. It took 24 hours to get everything imported into Lightroom. Well, Jared's reply to that, how many pictures did you take? And people take way too many photos. Well, here's my take on that. Yes, RAW files are going to be a lot bigger than JPEG. That's just the nature of the beast. There's not too much we can do with it. Some cameras compress them a little bit, some don't. On average, I remember my 5D Mark II was shooting about 24 megabyte RAW files, and the JPEGs were closer to 2. So that's 10 to 12 times the size for RAW, but you're getting all that extra data, which completely worth it in my opinion. Tony said 24 hours import. How many photos were you importing? On an average shoot, when I go do a mission shoot for the military, I shoot maybe 1,000 photos, and I can get those processed pretty quick. I dump them onto my hard drive from my memory card. Takes about 10-15 minutes. I'll batch rename them in Adobe Bridge. Takes a couple seconds, maybe a minute or two. And then I will import them into Lightroom. And altogether, that takes about 20 minutes. So this part, it really depends. How many images are you really taking? Are you taking more than 1,000 photos? That's up to you. Let's move on to one of the other points. Tony says, RAW takes up more hard drive space and memory cards will run out a lot faster. It's absolutely true. Jared Polin's reply to that, yes, RAW is much larger, but he also pays $500+ a year for cloud backup. Now, we have easily established that RAW is much larger than JPEG. You're getting all that extra data in there, and yes, you're paying for it in file size. Memory isn't free these days, but we're getting close to the point where it's super cheap. Remember, we're not paying $20 or $30 to process a roll of film anymore. Heck, I don't remember how much it even costs. It's ridiculous now because nobody processes film anymore. You have to pay for all the chemicals, all that good stuff. But now we're getting to the point where memory is stupidly cheap. You can buy a 64 gigabyte flash drive for 10 or 15, maybe 20 bucks. That's super cheap, and you have to keep it in perspective. How much did you pay for your camera? How much did you pay for your lens? You have to factor in the idea that photography isn't cheap. I know Jared mentioned if you can't afford it, get out of photography. I don't agree with that at all. I feel like anyone can do photography if they want to. You just have to think a little bit smarter, and think smarter, don't work harder. So, I can recommend Google Drive, 15 gigs free, Box.com, 10 gigs free. That's all cloud storage. I remember a couple years ago when I bought my first 1 terabyte hard drive, it cost me about 150 bucks. Nowadays, 150 bucks can easily buy you a 4 terabyte drive, or you can still get that 1 terabyte drive for probably under 40 bucks. I'm going to link down below to where you can find the hard drive that I have, or a couple that I'd recommend, but hard drives are getting pretty inexpensive. Save up for one. Maybe it takes you a year to save up for a hard drive. Just back all that up on your laptop, whatever you can do. Back it all up to Google Drive. When you run out, save up for that hard drive and buy that hard drive. Let's move on to the next point. So Tony says, I recommend beginners shoot RAW. When you get more experience, you can begin shooting JPEG because you don't need that margin of error. Jared's reply to that, I recommend shooting RAW and JPEG. Save your RAWs for when you know how to process them. Alright, so here's my take on that third point. So, I've been shooting RAW plus JPEG, oh man, since I started back on my first Nikon, which was a D60, that's what I originally learned on. about 12 years ago, I've been shooting RAW plus JPEG. Now, I didn't know what the heck to do with those RAW files. I just saw them. I saw there was so much data there, and I wanted all of that. I wanted as much data as I could. But when I actually got back to process them, I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I was too much contrast, too much sharpening, too much clarity. Because I wasn't shooting good photos to start with, I was trying to make up for it with the RAW files. I could process a little bit with a JPEG, do some cropping. That's all I really needed to do until I learned the power of RAW. I was way over processing my photos, and I think that's the temptation and the downfall of a beginner shooting with JPEG. So the analogy I'd like to use is a Ferrari and a Honda Civic. You don't want to start off with your first car being a Ferrari. Yes, the handling's awesome, it's fast, you're going 0 to 60 in like 2 seconds. And yeah, that would get a beginner somewhere really quick. And that would also get a beginner driving an awesome car with tight steering and great maneuverability. But what happens when you wreck that car because you're not fully prepared and you can't control all that power? That's like RAW versus JPEG. You start a beginner with a cheap car like a Honda Civic or a Toyota Corolla, so that, yeah, the steering's not that good, but they're going to learn how to be a great driver with that little bit of power first. And then, as you get better, you start to upgrade. You want to be able to nail that exposure, nail that focus with that sharp image. When you're shooting JPEG, you learn to tighten up those skills with the JPEG where you don't have that margin of error. And then when you shoot RAW, your images look that much better. Your images look fantastic when you open up that RAW file, and it's so much more satisfying. So that's my opinion on that third topic. Start with JPEG. Once you get the hang of it, once you're nailing your focus, once you're nailing that exposure and white balance, then it's time to open up those RAW files and see what you can do and just make awesome images. Alright, so the fourth point here that I'd like to bring up. Tony said in his video, JPEG files are great for casual photos, where there's nothing really serious if the picture doesn't turn out perfect. It's not that big of a deal. Jared's reply to that, if every photo you take isn't a big deal, just use your phone. I don't set out to take not interesting pictures. That's a great point, and I absolutely agree with Jared on this one. That's why I shoot RAW and JPEG. I never plan for a shoot to be important or not important. If I know something's not going to be important, why am I taking a photo of it? I treat everything and every shoot as if it might be important. It might be your next awesome image. It might be a great print. That's why I always want to shoot in RAW. If your shoot doesn't turn out great, you go on a photo walk and you get absolutely nothing, you have the option of deleting. It's not like film where you paid all that money to process the film and you came up with nothing. It's free to delete images. Yes, storage costs money, but it's absolutely free to get rid of all those images if nothing turned out well, and you get to reuse that memory card again, unlike film. Alright, so the next point that Tony makes. If you're shooting serious action where you might need to shoot as many frames per second as possible continually, and you're shooting thousands of pictures, JPEG is perfect for that because it's going to let your camera go fast. Jared's reply to that, don't overshoot. Don't spray and pray. The most basic cameras today can get 20 or 30 photos before outrunning the buffer. I agree and disagree with both of those. A, you shouldn't be shooting thousands of photos. Don't be spraying and praying. Look for moments. Be selective. That's why we're shooting photos and not video. I think Jared brought up that point. We're shooting photos to capture singular moments. We're not shooting thousands at a time or shoot video and just take out a frame. That's essentially what you're doing with JPEG. You're taking a low quality frame out of a bunch of continuous frames. Just shoot high quality video at that point and edit a JPEG out of your video stream. I also kind of disagree with Jared here. Most cameras aren't going to be shooting 20 or 30 frames per second. A D5, sure. I have a D5. I haven't taken it out of the box yet. But yes, you can shoot probably 20 or 30 raw frames per second. Actually, here we are. I'm going to bring this up in another video, but this is my D5. I don't know if it shoots 20 or 30 frames per second. But we're talking here, let's take this thing out of the bag. I have a D5, I have older cameras. I'm still not going to be shooting thousands of frames per second on my D5. If I want to pull out a JPEG out of a 4K video stream, that's great. But if I'm shooting sports, and I've shot sports before, you can see my video about my NFL football game that I shot, I'm not going to be spraying and praying. I'm going to selectively shoot maybe 5, 6, 7 shots of a moment, and that way, that guarantees that I captured that moment without filling up my image buffer, which is your internal memory, which loads all the processing and data gathering off your sensor so it can load onto your memory card. But I'm not going to be spraying and praying thousands of shots. That's not what photography is about, in my opinion. It's about capturing the moment and being good at capturing the moment. That's how you become a good photographer. Another point here. Tony says raw files are generally better for beginners because if they make a major mistake with the exposure, they're better able to recover it. Jared's reply to that: beginners have no clue what they're doing with raw files. I recommend shooting raw plus JPEG and save those raws until you know what you're doing with them. I absolutely agree with Jared on this one. I had no idea when I started shooting raw what to do with them. I went in there and I over-edited the heck out of those files, and I made some pretty terrible images. If I would have started with JPEG and then gone back and edited the raw after I knew what I was doing, after I knew how to nail that exposure and that focus and that white balance, I would have learned how to properly take images to start with. And then once I'm starting to take awesome images in JPEG, then I can start using those JPEG and raw files. Use my JPEG as preview, get rid of some of the files I don't want so I don't have to open every single raw file, and then open the raw files that I liked, that turned out well, and then just that much better of an image, that much data that I have to work with to make this image the best it could possibly be for a print or for an awesome photo that I can post online. So Tony says, if you shoot raw, buy more expensive cards. Jared replies, I absolutely agree. You don't spend all this money on cameras, lenses, accessories to have your photos fail because your memory card was a crappy one and crapped out on you. Jared and Tony agree on this. I agree right with them. You don't buy a crappy memory card with an awesome camera. You don't spend $6,000 on a D5 and then buy a $50 knockoff memory card. You buy a quality memory card and you budget that into your purpose. You're spending thousands of dollars on a camera to collect awesome images. You're spending thousands of dollars on lenses to get the best light quality. Why not spend $100, maybe a couple $100 on a fast, high quality, high capacity memory card to store all those images and not having to worry about it go corrupt or be too slow to capture images? So I agree with Tony and Jared on this point. And the last point here, Tony says, if your camera has 2 memory card slots, shoot RAW to the faster card and shoot JPEG to the slower card. Jared's reply, I shoot RAW and JPEG to both cards as a duplicate. Now this is the last point, and this is where I don't really agree with either, but that's okay. And you're allowed to make up your own decisions as well, how you want to shoot. If you want to shoot RAW to one card, JPEG to another card. If you want to shoot RAW and JPEG to one card and have it as a duplicate backup, or as I do, I use my memory cards and my dual slots as an overflow. So I'll shoot RAW and JPEG to one card, and then when it fills up, I'll shoot it to another card and use it as an overflow. So I'll fill up one card and it'll immediately start shooting to the next card. That's what works for me. What works for you might be different. If you're shooting a wedding, a super important event that you absolutely cannot do a second time and you can't repeat, you might want to shoot RAW and JPEG to one card and have a duplicate copy on the second card. When I shoot, I personally shoot quite a few images, and I like having that overflow so I don't run out when I'm in the middle of nowhere and I have no access to a card reader, a laptop to dump my images, an extra card, etc. I want to hear your guys' comments. What do you think about each of these questions? But remember, be respectful. I respect your guys' opinion. I respect Jared Polin's opinion. I respect Tony Northrup's opinion. We're all photographers. We're all playing the same game here. We all want the same thing, to be awesome photographers and to share knowledge with you guys and give you guys the option to talk back with us and have that conversation. So that's it for this episode. We're going to be doing a lot more RAW and JPEG comparisons in the next couple weeks, so stay tuned. Until then, if you like the content, make sure you're subscribing down below. Make sure you hit that like button and give it a like, give it a share, and don't forget to leave your opinions down below. I'll talk to you guys next week. Until then, get out and go shoot.